Remember the 2015 Fantastic Four movie?
Say that again?
Well, that film was completely different to what we almost got. And not just in the sense that there were different scripts, but there's concept art and even filmed footage that shows what the movie could have been. And because the movie was released in 2015, it means a lot of details surrounding the production have since been released over the years. So this is the story of what Fan4stic was originally going to be about, and why it was changed. Because of the licensing agreement between Marvel and 20th Century Fox, the latter had to start principal photography of a Fantastic Four movie no more than 7 years after the release of the previous Fantastic Four film, or the rights would revert back to Marvel Studios. And therefore, in 2009, Fox announced that they would be rebooting the Fantastic Four. Despite this, it wasn't until the 5th of May 2014 when production actually started. So Fantastic Four Rise of the Silver Surfer was released on June 15, 2007, and Fan4stic didn't start principal photography until May 5, 2014. That means they started filming 6 weeks before they would have lost the rights. So this could potentially be an indication that the movie was rushed into production. 20th Century Fox weren't just interested in making a Fantastic Four movie, they were excited about the possibility of it having a clear vision. Something that Josh Trank could provide after having just delivered a unique take on the superhero genre with Chronicle. Apparently Fox wanted a grounded, gritty version of Fantastic Four to contrast the others we'd gotten, which is not really a surprise, seeing as though many comic book movies were trying to replicate the success of The Dark Knight.
Why so serious?
Before Josh Trank signed on to direct the movie, several writers had written versions of the script, but Josh wasn't interested in any of them. Instead, Trank hired Jeremy Slater because he was a comic enthusiast, but 20th Century were nervous with this direction as he'd never written anything before. Trank gave Slater a bunch of ideas for the film, and then just let him do his thing. However, they eventually started having opposing opinions on what the movie should be about. Jezza felt like it should feel like the Avengers film, while Josh wanted a completely different tone. They were eventually able to find common ground, but once they got to the part of the script where the Fantastic Four get their powers, that's when they started having differing opinions again. Almost every conceivable idea was written into one draft or another, but Slater wasn't able to please Trank. You ready for this? 18 drafts were written, with over 2,000 pages of material. Jezza stated that Josh was the only point of contact to 20th Century Fox about the project. Slater wasn't allowed to communicate with them. Therefore, he estimated that about 95% of the notes received from the studio weren't passed on to him. And shortly after, he was kicked off the project and replaced with Simon Kinberg, someone more known to 20th Century Fox. However, Slater still ended up being credited for the movie. Now, when it comes to writing credits on a movie, if there are multiple people involved, you might see it say the word "and" or shorthand to "and." If you see the word "and," it means the writer worked on it separately before a different writer came in to write a separate draft. If you see the shorthand for "and," it means multiple people were working together on the same draft. So if we look at the writing credits for Fan4stic, Jeremy Slater wrote a draft, then left the project before Josh Trank and Simon Kinberg worked together to significantly change it. Even though enough of Slater's ideas were kept in the film, allowing him to remain credited, he's since said that his version was significantly different and more comic accurate to the version we ended up getting. And when I say comic accurate, more ultimate comic accurate. It seems like a lot of the early movie was similar, seeing the characters at a young age before studying at the very Marvel-named Baxter Building and building the Quantum Gate. But Slater's version didn't feature Sue or Johnny's father. In the released movie, Tim Blake Nelson plays a character named Dr. Allen, but prior to reshoots, he was actually Harvey Elder, who would have become Mole Man after getting moloid juice on him when trying to create artificial life with the very Marvel named Sue Storm. Doom would have been friendly to the very Marvel named Reed Richards, so he could unknowingly reveal his research to spies from Victor's home nation, Latveria. The setup to using the Quantum Gate would be quicker to what we see in the film. Then when Reed and Victor wanted to use the Quantum Gate, they would be denied. However, the pair plus Ben went anyway, while Sue and Johnny remained on Earth to send them there and back. The planet they teleported to is referred to as the Negative Zone, which Victor is the first person to step foot on, despite Reed promising Ben could be that person. While the setting is still barren, there were structures and skeletons, showing it was or still inhabited. Instead of sticking their hand directly into some lava-like goo, Reed, Victor and Ben came across Galactus, who blasts Doom with antimatter, seemingly killing him. There's also concept art showing Annihilus, who in some drafts was going to be that character, instead of Galactus. Richards and Grimm escape, but as they're teleporting back, the quantum gate is shot with dark matter that explodes onto Reed, Ben, Sue, and Johnny when they return to Earth. It seems like the body horror stuff all came from Jess's script, which was an aspect I kinda liked and wish they delved into more. Having something like that happen to you would be absolutely terrifying, particularly if you had Ben, Johnny, or Reed's powers. I mean, even for Sue, just disappearing randomly would be scary too. Now, I never really liked the 1-year time jump in the final version of the movie. However, Slater's version multiplied that by 4. I always felt like the time jump was something that was done in editing, but it seems like this was always in the script. So again, it doesn't seem like either iteration explored them becoming comfortable with their powers. After the time jump, Johnny is a reality TV star, Sue is doing cancer research at the Baxter Building while simultaneously searching for a cure for Ben, who's working for the military. Ben comes to accept who he is, but is annoyed at Reed because he literally abandoned them 4 years ago without any contact. I think that makes the 4-year time jump a bit too big. Like the final film, Reed would be blaming himself for all their transformations and hiding out in Jakarta. Even if Richards was trying to find a cure, not contacting his lifelong best friend for that long would have made it really difficult to become a likable character to audiences. What might have helped with his likability is that Reed creates Herbie, and there's concept art showing what it could have looked like, which I actually think is pretty cool. I know it's not comic accurate, but for a first movie where all the characters are still young, I like the idea of building up to comic accuracy. It's the same with the first Amazing Spider-Man suit. There were people who were critical of that design, but personally, I really appreciated the thought that went into it, using things like glasses for the eyes and shoes for the feet part. I think it's a great suit. Now, not only did Richards create Herbie, but he also built the first model Fan4stic car, which he would be trying to sell to Toyota. This again is something we have many images of concept art for, but we actually know the final design, because we have footage of them filming a couple of scenes with it.
This is by far the coolest thing you have ever done!
Those Latverian spies would come back into play when they used that knowledge they got off Reed to build their own quantum gate. However, as it opens, it brings in Galactus' herald, Victor Von Doom. Doom's design would be someone made entirely out of dark matter and had the powers of shapeshifting. However, there is concept art that has him with a mask. I actually don't mind some of these design looks. There are so many changes from page to screen for every comic book movie. I've made a whole series of videos out of it, so if this ended up working for the movie, I would have been okay with the alterations. Anyway, upon Doom's arrival, he takes over Latveria and rules with an iron fist. Just to be clear, Iron Fist is not in this movie. Doom isn't ruling alongside Danny, it's just a metaphor.
Metaphors are gonna go over his head.
Nothing goes over my head.
Reed is attacked by Latverians with weapons based on his designs, which makes him think Victor is still alive, so he uses the Fan4stic car to finally reunite back up with the other three and warn them. But as he does, Harvey has just become Mole Man, and a Moloid becomes Giganto, leading to a battle in New York City. This Mole Man stuff was actually an element of the script that Josh Trank liked.
I think you're gonna like this one.
The Fantastic Four would then have a battle against Doom in Latveria, as he's created a dark energy cannon. Except he doesn't intend on using it on the world, he actually wants to use it to destroy Galactus, who plans on eating Earth. Based on the research I did, it's unclear as to why the Fantastic Four actually fight Doom. Like he's trying to save Earth. But anyway, they end up defeating and trapping him in the negative zone. This version of the script also had a lot more creative uses of the team's powers. The script also seemed to be tonally different. Yes, there were horror-esque elements, but the Mole Man battle was described as being fun and comedic. This ultimately seemed like the thing that led to large alterations on the script by Josh Trank. Although, as it was taking so long to find a script that Josh was happy with, and the fact that principal photography had to begin by that certain date or risk losing the rights, it meant that when that date came, they didn't have a final act of the movie written. On top of that, Trank was getting a feel of what it was like to work on a studio movie, and he didn't like it. While he did praise the skill of all the people in the different departments, Josh soon found out that this was not his movie to make final calls on. He didn't own the Fantastic Four. Before the cameras started rolling, even people outside of the production were skeptical about the movie. The very model named Mads Mikkelsen auditioned for Dr. Doom. There were rumours that he walked out of the audition due to the unprofessional environment, but Mads has since clarified to London Film saying, "I didn't walk out. When I left, I was just like, this is crazy. I don't even have long arms. What am I doing here? The audition was only about long arms, no lines. I felt a little funny." Again, he was auditioning for Dr. Doom, not Reed Richards. The chaotic nature of pre-production was made even worse when rumoured sources say it was clear 20th Century Fox was worried about the film's success before filming, as they not only cut the budget by tens of millions, leading to the script having to be cut down just before filming, but also considered firing Trank before he got to say action. Ultimately, he remained in the director's seat, as it would be impossible to replace the role so close out unless it was with a director desperate for work. When filming came, there were allegations of erratic, reclusive, and absent-minded behaviour from Josh Trank, and also talk of him having a hyper-specific directing style, apparently telling actors when to blink and breathe during takes. In addition to this, there were reports of $100,000 worth of damage to the house he rented for the shoot, caused by his 3 dogs. Despite this, Trank claimed that he never got a complaint from the studio, and claimed that most of the allegations were untrue or at least highly exaggerated. I will note that he did say the words most and exaggerated, so things clearly happened behind the scenes. Mara told Collider in 2020 that she felt uncomfortable on the set of the movie. She didn't go into too much detail as to why, although it seemed to have something to do with the director, saying she didn't feel as if she could speak up for herself. It seemed to be a combination of Josh Trank's personality and the fact that the production was taking a massive toll on him mentally that led to the accusations about him on set. This mental toll on Trank even went back to when it was announced that Michael B. Jordan was cast as Johnny Storm, with both Michael and Josh receiving an overwhelming amount of hate and abuse. Good thing society has gotten over things like that now.
Part of that world.
I just want to point out that the colour of a character's skin is almost never relevant to a character. If I asked you to describe Johnny Storm in 3 words, none of those would be straight, white, or man. And no, that doesn't mean Ryan Gosling can play T'Challa. The character of T'Challa's Black Panther acts as a symbol for a civilization that literally avoided colonialism, so having the character be white would completely change who they are. Also, there are many groups of people who have been significantly underrepresented in leading or positive movie roles. Every comic book movie has a number of significant changes from page to screen. Again, I have a whole series about it. Yet, the only thing people seem to complain about is when they change the colour of the skin, or gender, because it's a lot easier to look at a picture and go, that's different, than read an entire comic. Also, a Black Johnny Storm is comic accurate, because the comics have established that there are an infinite amount of universes with every variation of every character. And before you dislike this video because I've gone too woke on you, can you please just think about what I'm saying? Why does it really bother you when they switch skin colours or genders? Again, you're not allowed to say because it's not comic accurate, because I already debunked that. You also can't say, I was only annoyed because Sue and Johnny have different skin colours despite being siblings in the comics, because this hate came before we even knew who was going to play Sue Storm. Anyway, in addition to this stress, Trank was simultaneously working on pre-production for a Boba Fett spin-off, which he eventually quit because he knew if he didn't, he was going to get fired.
Let's just say they might recognize my face.
By the time the first cut of Fan4stic was finished, Fox were not happy. They didn't feel as if it was marketable and thought it would greatly displease fans. Although, this was Trank's vision after all. Also, the movie didn't have an ending. They didn't film one during principal photography. They planned on doing that during the reshoots. Now, most studio films have reshoots, but the longer they go on, the more likely it is that the movie isn't currently in a good place. I couldn't find the exact number of days Fan4stic reshot for, but the word used by every single article was extensive reshoots. Due to this, it meant that they even had to use the money assigned for 3D conversion to pay for them, which I actually see as a positive. I hate post-conversion 3D. It ruined the cinema experience for a decade. It just made everything darker, and the 3D is barely noticeable. Anyway, these reshoots also led to scheduling conflicts with the actors, meaning filming had to be done on weekends, and Mara was required to wear a wig due to cutting her hair for a different project. Actors weren't even filming scenes together, with there being stand-ins for Miles Teller, who filmed much of it against a green screen. Trank also seemed to be given little to no involvement in both directing and writing the reshoots. Instead, Simon Kinberg and producer Hutch Parker were the ones who oversaw this stage. He did, however, manage to come to a deal with 20th Century Fox that would see him edit a version of the movie, and they could edit one of their own. They would then both be shown at test screenings before making a decision on which one to release based off the reception. Avatar and Pirates of the Caribbean editor, Stephen Rivkin, edited Fox's version, which Trank said used a completely different take for every single scene than what he had in his version. The studio ultimately went with Stephen's cut of the film, due to having done reshoots that would specifically work for his version. It's unclear as to who wrote these reshoots, but some of those ideas came from one of the 7,864 different versions of those drafts Jeremy Slater wrote, and some pages were even being written on the day. Despite this, Trank apparently, and also weirdly, emailed some of the cast and crew shortly before the release with a message that consisted of him saying that he thought the movie was better than 99% of comic book films ever made, to which one cast member allegedly responded with, "I don't think so." But Josh clearly changed his tune the literal day of the release, tweeting, "A year ago, I had a fantastic version of this, and it would have received great reviews. You'll probably never see it. That's reality though." He quickly deleted the tweet and had immediate regret, though it was too late, people had already seen it. I don't think it would have affected the box office too much though, because the behind the scenes drama was pretty public and the trailers weren't blowing people's minds. So when it was released, it wasn't a massive surprise that it only received 9% on Rotten Tomatoes from critics and 18% from audiences. It even ended up winning Worst Picture, Worst Director, and Worst Remake at the Razzies, which Trank said wouldn't have affected him too much if it wasn't for a production assistant going to accept the awards. Josh has since reviewed Fan4stic on Letterboxd, giving it 2 stars and saying, "The movie is alright. I was expecting it to be much worse than it was." There were some people calling for a hashtag release the Trank cut, but as I mentioned, the reshoots didn't film his version, so there isn't really any way to release a Trank cut without filming additional scenes. We do however know there are significant additions set in the first 2/3 of the film because of the behind the scenes footage and clips in trailers, most notably Ben's plane jump. Box office wise, it made $167.9 million worldwide on a budget, with marketing factored in, of $200 million. So unfortunately, it was a financial disaster.
Dr. Doom over here.
As I mentioned, the whole process took a massive toll on Trank, who didn't end up directing another movie for 5 years. When he eventually returned to make Capone, it too wasn't reviewed particularly well, but Josh said that he was able to feel more comfortable about these criticisms because this was his version of the movie he made. According to the very mobile named Mark Miller, who co-wrote the Ultimate Fantastic Four comics that inspired this movie, Fan4stic was intended to take place in the same universe as the X-Men universe, though others claim this was more a wait-and-see situation. Basically, if the movie did well and was positively reviewed, a crossover between the Fantastic Four and X-Men would be heavily considered. Even before filming started, 20th Century Fox announced that a sequel for Fan4stic would be released in mid-2017. And even after the film's release, Simon Kinberg said that those sequel plans were still in motion, only it looked likely the date would be pushed back. Tommy Wiseau, director of The Room, a film which is often considered to be the worst movie ever made, said that he enjoyed Fan4stic and expressed interest in directing the sequel. But based on everything I've explained in this video, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise that these plans were cancelled. The original plans based on Jeremy Slater's script was to end Fan4stic with the government being warned that Galactus is coming, setting up the sequel. But because the final film left Galactus completely out, who knows where this sequel could have gone. Despite this, Fox still had the rights to the Fantastic Four until 2022, so they either had to make a sequel or reboot it again to keep those rights. But those rights went back to Disney 3 years earlier when said company bought 20th Century Fox in 2019. It's also worth mentioning though that Tim Miller was originally going to direct Deadpool 2 after he'd done the first one, and there's concept art by Alexander Lozano art showing this version of the Fantastic Four making a cameo, and the Thing would be wearing pants. Retrospectively looking back, Trank admittedly stated that he probably should have embraced Jeremy Slater's ideas more than he did, but putting all those behind the scenes dramas to the side and speaking exclusively about the story, it kinda seems like Josh Trank had a vision, 20th Century Fox trusted that vision, but when it was made, realised it probably wasn't the best way to go, and decided to fix it without Trank's involvement. If the movie worked, other superhero films would have taken those kinds of risks for the next decade, although unfortunately, it wasn't fantastic.
Say that again?
Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments what Fantastic Four movie is your favourite, and don't forget to absolutely obliterate those like, subscribe and share buttons. I'm just kidding. Only do it with enough force that it registers. I don't want any of you breaking whatever device you're watching this on.